So hopefully you found in question number 1 that option 2, the percentage of interest, was a far more advantageous option. In fact, you earn almost double the amount of money in interest by having a percentage compared to the more basic arithmetic situation. So hopefully you're fairly well convinced now that a percent multiplier is a great thing to have, because a percent multiplier grows much more significantly than a straight simple interest, which we call an arithmetic situation. Now question number 2 sort of bases its assumption on the idea that you already understand percentages are the best way to help your money grow. Percentages are going to give you the most interest. Now the question is, how do we think about our percentage? And how do we think about how often the bank is willing to give us that reward, that 8%, to say, hey, thanks for keeping your money with us? So in question number 2, you're going to see another option presented. It's still going to ask us to use the same options as above, which means the initial value will still be $1,000. But this time they're going to compound it quarterly. The phrase compounded is actually a synonym for the word divided. So this interest situation is what we call divided quarterly. Now that means instead of giving us 8% all at once, like they did in number 1, they're going to give us smaller chunks of that 8% over 4 quarters of the year. So picture the year's calendar being divided into 4 chunks. So like in that first chunk of time between January and March, for example, they'll give you a smaller chunk of your interest, your thank you payment, in that first chunk. Then in the springtime, they'll give you another chunk. So somewhere between April and June, they'll give you the second chunk of your 8% thank you. And then in the next quarter, sometime during the summer, probably between July and September, say, or July and October, they'll give you the third chunk of your 8% thank you. And then somewhere around Christmas time, they'll give you the fourth and final chunk of your thank you money. So instead of giving you 8% all at once, they're essentially dividing it into 4 smaller sub-payments. So if you think logically, 8% divided into 4 quarterly payments means that you're really going to get a 2% payment every quarter. So that's what we call the percent interest you'll receive. You'll receive 2% interest each quarter instead of one giant lump 8% once a year. Now, of course, we can use the same logic we've been using with percent multipliers. How would you write it as a multiplier? Same as we always do. We would take 100% of what we're starting with, plus, because interest increases, 2%. 100% plus 2% is 102%. Convert that to a decimal, you get 1.02. So now that I know I'm going to have an interest rate of 1.02, it wants us to fill in the table to show how this option grows. And I can use an equation, or I can use the fact that 1.02 is a multiplier, and I can make quick work of this table. We know that we're going to start with the same initial value of $1,000. We know our multiplier is 1.02 because of the percentage. So $1,000 times 1.02 is 1,020. If I multiply again by 1.02, I'll start to get the next number. And you can continue this pattern as quickly as you feel comfortable doing so. The nice thing is if you have a calculator like this with this sort of copy and paste feature that says ANS, you can just keep pressing enter, and it gives you a series of numbers in a row that you can just kind of quickly generate. Now, I'm not going to write all the numbers in the table just for the sake of time. You can figure those out on your own and use the answer key to help you check. I want to get to the important stuff, which would be like question letter D. Let's write the equation. This is a percentage situation, therefore it has a multiplier, therefore it's geometric. I'm going to write a geometric equation. So I need y equals my initial value, which is 1,000, times my multiplier, which is 1.02, to the power of x. Now, of course, just to remind ourselves, x is the number of quarters that we were dealing with. Quarter in this context, remember, refers to time, quarterly. And y represents the number of dollars we're earning as our investment grows. In letter E, it says how much money will we have after 2 years. Now, of course, that's why I want to say to myself, oh, wonderful, I'll just use the table. But I realize there's a mismatch. 2 years is not the value 2 in the table. This value 2 is 2 quarters. And that's not really the same amount of time. 2 quarters is only like 6 months. Remember how a year is 4 quarters? It takes you all the way to here in the table, all the way to quarter 4 to see 1 year's worth of time. So I don't want to just look at the table and say to myself, oh, just go to 2 and be done. That's not true. I have to think about how many quarters are in 2 years because this table is measuring in quarters. If I think about that logically, 4 quarters would happen in 1 year. So 2 quarters must be 2 years. And I'll just think about that just so I can give myself some reference here. 2 quarters would mean that I'm stopping at quarter number 8. Now, should you want to, especially if you're like me and got a little bit lazy about the table, you could also take a little shortcut here using your equation. We know that x is the number of quarters. It takes 8 quarters to finish the time. So 1,000 times 1.02 to the power of 8 quarters gives me the number that I'm looking for, 1,171 and 66 cents. Now, questions lettered F, G, and H are all going to ask you the same idea. So I would consider using your calculator and your equation again to answer those questions, because ultimately what it's going to ask you to do is to think big picture. Once you know how much money you'll have in your account after 4 years, and just remember, pay attention how many quarters are in 4 years, and how much you'll have after 20 years. And again, pay attention to the detail there. It's measuring in quarters, so think about how many quarters are in 20 years when you plug in your number. And then in letter H, it's going to say, okay, comparatively, which option really is the best? If you go all the way back to number 1, letter C, actually number 1, letter D, sorry, and take your answer for option number 1 after 20 years, option number 2 for 20 years, and now here's this new option for 20 years. It wants you to do a 3-way comparison and to say which one is the best, and to hopefully make an observation about something. What do you notice about the option that was the best, and why do you think that happened? So take some time to finish question number 2. Use your answers from number 1 to help you do letter H, and then hopefully we can start to make some sense of this interest thing so that we can do these problems more efficiently.